Taehyung yelled at Jungkook in the studio for the unfinished song, but when he heard it, Taehyung's tears flowed down. What really happened? Why are you always like this, Jungkook? Why do you always disappoint me? The words shot out sharply from Taehyung's lips, echoing through the otherwise silent studio. His hand gripped the microphone tightly, his face flushed with anger, and his eyes locked onto Jungkook, who stood frozen in the corner of the room, unable to move. The heat in Taehyung's chest felt suffocating, as if a burning fire had been ignited deep inside him. The song they had worked on for weeks, the one that was supposed to be their masterpiece, was now on the verge of failing because Jungkook couldn't finish it. Someone who should have understood how important this was to both of them. Taehyung felt humiliated in front of the entire team in the studio. Everyone has put everything they have into this, and you can't even finish it? Don't you care? The words burst from him, his frustration echoing in every corner of the room. Jungkook, who was usually calm and avoided conflict, could only stare at the floor. No defense, no explanation, just silence that filled the air, thick and suffocating. Jungkook, Taehyung moved toward him, his glare burning with a fury that seemed unstoppable. This isn't just a song. This is our lives, our future. Don't you know that? Jungkook lifted his gaze slightly, then quickly looked away, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. I've been trying. His voice was barely a whisper, fragile and breaking. Taehyung let out a bitter laugh, the sound of it vibrating in the tense air. Trying? Is that all you've got? You're trying, or you're giving up. There's a difference, Jungkook. Everyone in the room stood still, frozen in place. Sweat dripped down Taehyung's neck, but he couldn't stop the storm inside him. He felt as if everything they had worked for had just crumbled to the ground. If you can't finish this, maybe this isn't the place for you. Taehyung's voice cracked, trying to choke back his rising anger. Maybe we should just quit. Jungkook raised his head, his eyes full of pain. You don't know what I'm going through, he said, his voice trembling with emotions he'd kept buried. I've been trying, harder than you think. But those words only made Taehyung angrier. I've heard enough of your excuses. It's over. Without another word, Taehyung stormed out of the studio, leaving Jungkook and the entire team standing there, stunned, as the moment they both wished never happened hung heavily in the air. The days that followed were heavy with the weight of unsaid words and unresolved emotions. Taehyung couldn't shake off the image of Jungkook's empty gaze, the way his voice had quivered when he tried to explain himself. The anger that had flared up in the studio only seemed to grow inside him, but so did the guilt. He had never shouted like that before, not at Jungkook, not at anyone. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear the echoes of his own harsh words. It's over. The phrase repeated in his mind like a mantra he couldn't escape from. And the more he thought about it, the worse he felt. Was he really right? Was Jungkook truly the one to blame? Or was it Taehyung who had pushed him too hard, demanded too much? Meanwhile, Jungkook had withdrawn even further into himself. The usual spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet emptiness that Taehyung could sense even from a distance. Jungkook didn't reach out, didn't send any texts, didn't try to explain himself. He simply disappeared into the silence, a silence that seemed to grow between them with each passing day. Taehyung's mind wandered back to the studio that day, replaying every moment in his head. The words he had spat out, the disappointment on Jungkook's face. He didn't know if he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, but the guilt gnawed at him, eating away at his confidence. It was late one night when Taehyung stood alone in the practice room, staring at the empty stage. He had been here countless times before, but tonight it felt different, empty, somehow. The usual excitement of creating something new was gone, replaced with an unbearable weight in his chest. Just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen. A single message, sent by Jungkook. The final version of the song is ready. Taehyung's heart skipped a beat. The song, the one they had been working on for so long. He hadn't expected Jungkook to even bother after what happened. But there it was, a single sentence that pierced through his anger and doubt like a sharp blade. He quickly opened the file Jungkook had attached. His fingers hovered over the play button, unsure whether he was ready to hear what was coming. He'd been so certain that Jungkook had failed him, that the song was doomed to fall short of their dreams. But what if it wasn't? What if Jungkook had given everything he had, despite Taehyung's words. With a deep breath, Taehyung hit play. At first, it was just the soft hum of an intro, a melody so gentle it felt like a quiet apology. The notes were delicate, drawn out with careful precision, as if each one had been placed there with intention. Taehyung's fingers tightened on the edge of his phone, his eyes fixed on the screen as the song slowly unfolded. And then, Jungkook's voice. So pure, so raw. But there was something different about it, something Taehyung had never heard before. The song wasn't the upbeat anthem they had once envisioned. Instead, it was a reflection of something deeper, darker, hidden away behind Jungkook's usual quiet demeanor. The lyrics cut straight to the core of his soul. I feel alone, even when I'm surrounded by thousands. The line hit Taehyung like a punch to the gut. The melody swirled around the words, each note carrying a weight of emotion Taehyung hadn't expected. The deeper the song went, the more Taehyung realized just how much he had misjudged the situation. Jungkook had never been the type to speak up about his struggles, his isolation, or the pressure he felt. But in that song, Taehyung could hear everything. The sacrifices, the battles, the fear that had always lurked behind his friend's silence. As the final chorus faded out, Taehyung felt a lump rise in his throat. The realization hit him like a wave, drowning him in regret. How could I not see this? How could he have been so blind? Jungkook had poured his heart into the song, and Taehyung had treated it like a failure. Worse, he had treated Jungkook like one. Tears welled up in his eyes, and before he knew it, they were streaming down his face. He had never felt so small, so selfish. The song wasn't just a song. It was a cry for help, a confession of everything Jungkook had been too afraid to say out loud. Taehyung wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his heart heavy with guilt. He had to make things right. But how? He stared at the phone in his hand, unsure of what to do next. He wanted to apologize, to explain himself, but the words seemed to escape him. What if Jungkook didn't want to hear it? What if he was too hurt to even listen? There was only one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't keep running from this. If he truly wanted to fix things, to heal the rift between them, it had to start now. The morning after Taehyung had listened to the song, his head felt heavy. The regret, the guilt, and the realization that he had pushed Jungkook to a breaking point gnawed at him throughout the day. He replayed the song over and over in his mind, each note echoing the pain that Jungkook had hidden for so long. How had I not noticed? Taehyung wondered, feeling like the biggest fool. The song wasn't just a melody. It was a plea, a raw confession of emotions Jungkook had kept locked away from the world, and especially from Taehyung. Taehyung had always been the passionate one, the one who wore his heart on his sleeve. But Jungkook, the younger one, had always been quieter, more reserved. He thought he understood Jungkook, but now, he realized how little he truly knew about his friend's struggles. How many times had he brushed off Jungkook's quiet moments as a mere lack of effort? How many times had he taken his friend's silence as indifference? The guilt was unbearable, and Taehyung couldn't shake the image of Jungkook's hurt face when he had shouted at him in the studio. The worst part was that, even though Taehyung had been angry, there was a part of him that knew he hadn't been entirely wrong. The song had been delayed, the final version late. Things hadn't gone as planned, and Taehyung had felt desperate. But now that he knew the truth behind it, he wondered if there had been a better way to handle it, a way that wouldn't have shattered their bond. At lunch that day, Taehyung found himself sitting alone in the cafeteria, his thoughts spiraling. He had tried texting Jungkook, but the messages had gone unanswered. It was like he was being shut out, and the emptiness that filled the space between them felt suffocating. I need to talk to him, Taehyung thought. But every time he thought about facing Jungkook, his heart raced with a mix of fear and regret. What if Jungkook didn't want to hear his apology? What if the damage had already been done, and there was no way to fix it? As he sat there, staring at his untouched lunch, his phone buzzed on the table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Jungkook. We need to talk. The message was brief, but it carried an urgency that made Taehyung's stomach tighten. He quickly typed back, his fingers shaking. Where? The studio. I'll be there in an hour. Taehyung's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that this conversation was long overdue. It was the moment he had been dreading and hoping for. Jungkook was finally willing to face him. An hour later, Taehyung stood in front of the studio door, his palms sweaty and his mind racing. He wasn't sure what to say or even if words could make up for the pain he had caused. But he knew he had to try. When he pushed the door open, he saw Jungkook sitting at the mixing board, his back to Taehyung. The dim lighting in the room cast shadows over his figure, making him look smaller, more distant than Taehyung had ever seen him. Jungkook. Taehyung's voice was softer than he intended, a mixture of regret and fear. Jungkook turned around slowly, his expression unreadable. His eyes were still carrying the weight of something unspoken, but there was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet, sad acceptance. Taehyung, Jungkook said, his voice low but steady. I wasn't sure if we'd be able to talk again after everything, but I think we need to. I think I need to say what I didn't say before. Taehyung's heart sank. I'm sorry, he blurted out, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I shouldn't have yelled at you. Jungkook raised a hand, stopping him before he could continue. Taehyung, I'm not here to blame you, he said quietly. I know I messed up too, but I think we both have our own things we need to understand. I wasn't just holding back on the song. I was holding back from you. From everyone. Taehyung frowned, confused. What do you mean? Jungkook let out a long, slow breath. I've been struggling for a long time. With the pressure, with trying to be perfect, trying to meet everyone's expectations. But what you don't see is that I've been falling apart inside. And I didn't want to tell you, because I thought you'd think I was weak, that I wasn't trying hard enough. But the truth is, I didn't know how to say it. So I buried it. I buried it in the song. Taehyung stood still, his mind racing. But why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you ask for help? Jungkook looked down, his hands clasped together. Because I didn't want to burden you. You have your own battles to fight. And I didn't want to be the one holding you back. But I see now that I was pushing you away when I should have been leaning on you instead. The words hit Taehyung like a wave. He hadn't known. He had never known how much Jungkook was carrying alone. The thought that Jungkook had been trying to protect him, even at the cost of his own well-being, was overwhelming. I'm sorry, Taehyung whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I should have seen it. I should have been there for you. Jungkook gave a small, sad smile. It's okay. I didn't make it easy for you to see. The room was quiet for a long moment, the air thick with the weight of their unspoken words. Finally, Taehyung spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have trusted you. I should have trusted that you were giving everything you had, even if it wasn't the way I expected. Jungkook nodded slowly. I wanted you to understand, and I didn't know how to say it. For the first time in days, Taehyung felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't too late. They hadn't completely lost each other. Do you think we can fix this? Taehyung asked, his voice uncertain but full of a fragile hope. Jungkook looked at him, his expression softening. I think we can. And for the first time in a long time, Taehyung believed it too. The days following their conversation in the studio were marked by quiet steps toward reconciliation. Taehyung and Jungkook had made a silent pact to rebuild the trust that had been fractured, but the process wasn't easy. Every time they crossed paths, there was an unspoken understanding between them. The weight of the past few weeks hung over them, but each conversation, each glance, felt like they were learning how to communicate again. Taehyung made sure to listen more, to give Jungkook the space to speak without interrupting. He noticed things he hadn't before. The way Jungkook would nervously tap his fingers on the table when he was deep in thought, or how his eyes would briefly close when he was frustrated, as if trying to hold back tears. These small details were like clues to the puzzle of Jungkook's silent struggles. Jungkook, in turn, began to open up more. He confessed to Taehyung the pressures he had been hiding for months, the stress of balancing expectations with his own dreams. He spoke of his doubts, the fear that he was never enough. But it was the song that allowed them to connect fully. Both of them poured their emotions into it, using it as a bridge to cross the chasm that had once divided them. The final version of the song was unlike anything they had ever done before. It wasn't just music, it was their story, their pain, and their healing. They worked late into the night, tweaking the lyrics, adjusting the melody, until it felt complete. In the studio, there was no longer tension, just the sound of two people working together, creating something that reflected their journey. When the song was finished, Taehyung sat back, listening to the final product. His heart swelled with pride, but more than that, with gratitude. He was grateful for Jungkook's courage to face him, to trust him again. And he was grateful for the way they had both grown. both in their music and in their friendship. "I think this is our best work yet," Taehyung said softly, his voice full of emotion. Jungkook smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "It's not just our best work. It's the one that means the most." The release of their song was imminent. Taehyung felt a flutter of nerves in his chest as he sat in the studio, staring at the final draft on his screen. This wasn't just any release. It was the one they had fought for, the one that had been forged in their struggles, their apologies, and their shared desire for redemption. For the first time in months, Taehyung felt the weight of everything lift, even if only slightly. The music, which had once felt like a burden, now felt like a testament to their growth, both as artists and as people. Jungkook, too, seemed different. The tension that had once shadowed his every move had dissipated, replaced by a quiet confidence. He was no longer hiding in the background, afraid to show the cracks in his armor. Now, he stood beside Taehyung, shoulders squared, eyes focused. They had a performance scheduled for the release, and the anticipation was palpable. But it wasn't just about performing for the fans. It was about performing for themselves, about facing their fears and showing the world who they truly were. Taehyung looked over at Jungkook, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. "Are you nervous?" Taehyung asked, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Jungkook turned toward him, a faint smile of his own appearing. "Yeah," he admitted. "But it feels different now. I'm not scared of the song anymore. Or of us." The simplicity of his words made Taehyung's heart skip a beat. He hadn't realized how much he had been fearing the outcome of everything, what it would mean for their friendship, their careers, and even their identities. But hearing Jungkook say that, something inside Taehyung clicked. They had made it through the hardest part. The rest of the day passed in a blur, filled with rehearsals and last-minute adjustments. As the time for their performance drew nearer, a sense of unity filled the air. There was no longer any divide between them, no more anger, no more misunderstandings. They were ready to face the world together, as they had always dreamed of. When the moment arrived, the crowd's roar filled their ears. The stage lights were blinding, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Taehyung could feel the adrenaline rushing through his veins, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was excitement. Excitement for what they had created, for what they had overcome, and for what was yet to come. As they stepped out onto the stage, side by side, Taehyung glanced at Jungkook. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, everything else faded away. There was no past disappointment, no lingering guilt, just the present, just the song, just them. They took their positions, the first notes rang out, and as they sang together, Taehyung felt an overwhelming sense of connection. They were no longer two separate people with their own burdens. They were a team, a unit that had learned to trust each other in ways they never had before. The crowd's energy surged, but all Taehyung could focus on was Jungkook's voice blending with his, harmonizing in perfect unity. The music, the words, the feeling, it all felt like it was meant to be. And in that moment, Taehyung knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter for them both. After the performance, as they stood backstage, breathless and smiling, Taehyung turned to Jungkook. "We did it," he said, his voice full of awe. Jungkook smiled, his eyes shining with something deeper than just pride. "No," he said softly, "we're doing it." And with that, Taehyung realized the true meaning of the song. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about flawless performances or flawless friendships. It was about the courage to face the hard truths, to embrace the messy parts of themselves, and to move forward together. The months that followed the release of their song were a whirlwind of success, but also reflection. Taehyung and Jungkook were no longer the same people who had entered the studio that fateful night. They had grown, individually and together, forging a deeper bond that transcended their music. Yet, the journey of redemption wasn't as simple as it seemed. The weight of their past actions lingered, but with each performance, each interaction, they built a stronger foundation. The fans loved the song. Its raw honesty and emotion resonated with so many. Yet, the real victory lay in how the song had healed them both. For Taehyung, it had opened his eyes to the importance of patience and understanding, while for Jungkook, it was the first step toward opening up, allowing himself to be vulnerable, not just in his music, but in life. But success didn't come without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, nights spent questioning whether they were truly ready for the responsibility that came with their newfound visibility. The pressure, once again, threatened to overwhelm them. Despite their growth, the burden of expectations continued to press heavily on their shoulders. One evening, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, Taehyung found himself sitting in the quiet of the studio, staring at the wall, the silence around him almost suffocating. He heard footsteps and turned to see Jungkook standing in the doorway, looking hesitant but determined. "Taehyung," Jungkook said quietly, "I think we need to talk." Taehyung nodded, unsure of what this conversation would hold, but knowing it was necessary. Jungkook walked over and sat next to him, both of them silent for a long while. "I've been thinking," Jungkook began, his voice low, "about everything that happened, about how we've changed, and how much we still have to learn." Taehyung turned to him, his heart pounding. "I know. It's not over yet, is it?" Jungkook shook his head. "No, there's no end to this. We keep learning, keep growing, and sometimes we fall back. But we can't stop. Not now." The words hung between them, filled with the weight of their shared journey. Taehyung realized in that moment that healing wasn't a destination. It was an ongoing process. There would always be struggles, doubts, and moments of weakness. But it was in those moments that they had to rely on each other more than ever. "We'll be okay," Taehyung said, his voice steady. "We have each other, and that's enough for now." Jungkook nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "Yeah, it is." And as they sat together in the quiet, the weight of the world didn't seem so heavy anymore. The road to redemption wasn't an easy one, but with each other, they knew they could face whatever came next. Months had passed, and the world seemed to move in fast forward. Taehyung and Jungkook had reached the peak of their careers, but the journey wasn't defined by their success or fame. It was defined by the quiet moments, the times they spent reflecting on everything they had been through, together and apart. Their bond was no longer just about music. It had become something deeper, something unspoken yet undeniable. The lessons they had learned from their struggles, their conflicts, and their resolution were now woven into every note, every lyric, every performance. The day of their final concert of the tour arrived, and with it, a sense of finality, at least for this chapter of their lives. They had made it. Their song, their story, had been shared with the world, and it had changed everything. But Taehyung knew that even as the curtains fell on this chapter, the story was far from over. As they stood backstage, preparing for the final performance, Taehyung glanced over at Jungkook, who was adjusting his guitar, his face calm yet focused. Despite the confidence he saw in his friend, Taehyung knew Jungkook was still carrying the weight of everything they had been through. But now, there was a peace in the way Jungkook held himself, a quiet strength that Taehyung couldn't help but admire. "I think we've made it," Taehyung said, his voice soft, but full of meaning. Jungkook looked up at him, his eyes reflecting the same quiet understanding. "We've made it through everything, Taehyung." The song, it wasn't just a message to the world. It was a message to ourselves. "We've learned what it means to trust each other, to lean on each other." Taehyung nodded, the weight of those words sinking in. The crowd outside was waiting, their cheers already echoing through the walls, but it was the two of them standing in this quiet moment together that felt most important. This was their victory, not the applause, not the recognition, but the understanding they had reached, the emotional and personal growth they had undergone. The stage lights blinked, signaling it was time. Their final performance. As they stepped out onto the stage, Taehyung's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no longer any fear. There was only the music, only the connection they shared. The song played, and as they sang together, something shifted in the air. The world felt lighter, brighter. Each note was filled with the energy of their journey, the pain, the healing, the redemption. The crowd screamed, their voices blending with the music, but Taehyung only had eyes for Jungkook, his partner, his friend, the one who had walked this path with him. The last chorus hit, and the energy between them reached its peak. As they sang the final lines, Taehyung looked at Jungkook, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. There was no need for words. Everything they had been through was captured in that shared look. When the song ended, the stage was filled with thunderous applause. But all Taehyung could feel was the presence of Jungkook beside him, the unshakable bond between them that no success, no failure, no obstacle could break. Later, As they stood in the dressing room, breathless from the performance, Taehyung smiled at Jungkook. "We've come a long way." Jungkook smiled back, his eyes tired but content. "Yeah, we have. And we'll keep going." And with that, Taehyung realized that this was just the beginning. Not of a career, not of a song, but of a lifelong journey. Together, they had walked through the storm and come out stronger, more connected.